Hi, welcome everybody to another session of Making AI Possible, brought to you by Caltech Center for Technology and Management Education. My name is Nicholas Beaudoin. I'm the director of our AI programs at Caltech CTME. CTME is an organization, a part of Caltech, where we bring in companies, individuals, public institutions to learn from professors, researchers, research labs, and more also industry experts. Those industry experts come from various elements of AI industry, systems engineering industry, and project management functionalities. We specialize in both bringing folks to campus, showcasing a lot of the lab's professors, and then also coming to you around the world, be remote and in person. Today, I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Crystal Dilworth. Dr. Dilworth is no stranger to what goes on at Caltech, having earned her PhD at Caltech in neuroscience. She's a neuroscientist, a science communicator, a leadership strategist who bridges worlds of science, technology, and human storytelling. Very excited because she serves as strategic advisor and science communicator, which intertwines very much with the conversations that we've been having over this last year. She helps teams around tech and innovation translate complex ideas into human-centered impact. Some of the most famous stuff that she's worked on is spent a lot of time with PBS, Voice of America, CBS's Mission Unstoppable as Dr. Brain, and also leads the Crystalline Group to reimagine how science, culture, and leadership intersect. Lastly, this is my favorite part. She's the host of Caltech's 100 plus year ongoing lecture series, taking the torch and blazing a new path as she brings in the brightest minds of Caltech faculty, which is a public lecture series that's open to anybody who's in Pasadena. So, Dr. Dilworth, I'd like to welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for our conversation.
Great. So we're going to dive right into it. So the first part of this is we're going to discuss about your work as a science communicator and the efforts that you use to study and train scientists. And this is really around making the transition from, say, business leadership, entrepreneurship directly from the lab. So here's the first question for you. When you have a scientist coming out of the lab, has a great widget, has a great discovery, but now they're forced into a leadership or entrepreneurial role, what is the common gap in communication that you tend to see the most?
Okay, well, the thing that I always say is that when you are in an academic program and you're getting your PhD, when you graduate, you are going to end up managing people, money, or both. And you're not trained in any way how to do that. You're also highly specifically trained to communicate only to subject matter experts in your own field. So,
So you're saying in your PhD program at Caltech, all the years you spent, there's no class in entrepreneurship, leadership, how to take an idea to execution in industry.
No, you have to go looking for those resources on campus yourself. And there is, entrepreneurship forums and other places to do that. But when you're an overwhelmed student and things are not coming to you, and also, I like to say when you leave academia, you kind of have to shed all of those expectations about how the world works, right? You've been in a very
Yeah.
specific system. It's kind of like moving from a huge company to a startup. Like the entire system of how work is done is completely different. And that can be, a huge process of personal transformation and adaptation. Not just in terms of what we call the horizontal skills, the ability to learn new things, like learning a new language, whether it's a computer language, or a technical skill, but also in, what we call, vertical skill development, which is the ability to communicate across cultures, handle complexity, be effective in environments with high uncertainty. These are all, different growth curves that one would find themselves on when they're making this transition. I do a lot of work with academic scientists right now that are looking to communicate to stakeholder groups that they are not familiar with. In the absence of, the US government funding, where do they go and how do they communicate the meaning of their work and why it's important and why it deserves support to family offices, to philanthropic organizations, and to companies that might want to support them. These are completely different environments to communicate in. The expectations that the stakeholders have are different. The method of how they communicate in order to connect is different. And I experienced this really strongly when I was making my own transition, coming out of academia and moving into this television host role. I was working for Al Jazeera America. We were on this show called Techno. It was an amazing show. What they did was they took a bunch of young scientists, put them together with really seasoned field producers, like 60 Minutes, Dateline, like hard hitting real news shows. And they sent us out in the field together. And it was the producer's job to teach us how to do TV. And one of the things that I learned really quickly is that the way that academics ask questions is not consistent with the way that a television audience wants to get their information. So, I would be sitting across from a subject matter expert or a thought leader on whatever topic we were covering. And I would say, I understand the following. And then I would describe my entire understanding of their field. And then I would ask my question. And by that time, it's 20 minutes later, my producer's banging their head against the wall. And that's not how you create a soundbite. So that's one example of how the information that needs to be communicated is understood in a completely different way in the academic environment versus if I'm, a television journalist or a television host. That's the translation that I work on, when I'm working either one-on-one with technical experts or in a group setting.
Do you have any strategies for, a lot of the folks listening are in consulting, they're in business. So many of them are entrepreneurs themselves. What are some of the, maybe is, Dr. Dilworth's top 3 how to make a pitch in, the easiest, succinct way? What are some lessons learned that you've seen?
Number 1 is know what the person you're talking to cares about. Like one of the biggest mistakes that academics make is that we love to talk about what we think is interesting, but that does not necessarily have anything to do with the reason that our audience is there. And so, beyond if you're an entrepreneur, beyond the Y Combinator accelerator checklist of things that you're supposed to have in your pitch deck, really try and understand not just on the surface, what that investor or that stakeholder is interested in, but on a personal level, why are they listening to you? And then the other mistake that I see really often is thinking that you have to put on some kind of external persona. So some of the coaching that I really like to do is working with an individual's own personality and own impulses, right? And using that in a creative and constructive way, and not, you have to put on this suit and you have to act a certain way. And this is the character that you have to project in the world. But how do you take your authentic self and turn it into something that's identifiable, understandable, and effective in the new environment that you're hoping to be an effective communicator in?
And I think we can see that in any industry. There's probably tons of books written on bringing your authentic self and, showing up as who you are. As scientists, do you have to bring your authentic self to when it comes to showcasing your work? Or do you put on a different persona if this is, say, for example, it's a National Science Foundation grant and you're presenting, or if it's maybe a Watson lecture crowd? Do you have to change how you interact with the audience, or can you bring, your research lab coat with you every presentation you do?
It depends on what role the audience is expecting you to play. Mm-hmm. If you're there as the subject matter expert and as the egghead, then yeah, definitely you wear your coat and you represent that side, of the story. But if you are hoping to advance your own goals and your own ambitions, then you have to make a decision about what order the information that you want to convey is, put in how aggressive you choose to be in pursuing your goals, and also the tone that you want to take. So I think it really is, you are always yourself, but as a person on the spectrum, sometimes being your complete and authentic self in all social situations is not particularly effective. So understanding how to channel who you are in the right ways for the right circumstance, I think, is incredibly important.
Amen. I think I can agree with that. Now, in one of the discussions we had beforehand, I really like this question that we kept kind of tinkering through is, With AI playing such an increasing role in things like data synthesis, analysis, even presentation, what aspect of scientific communication still remains a challenge, and what communication and operational frictions cannot be eliminated by AI technology? Essentially, what can AI technology not replace in this conversation we're having?
Meaning, it can show you what, but not tell you what it means,
Hmm.
right? So I've always said that data are completely irrelevant until a observer comes along to embed meaning in those data, and they do that by telling a story. And while AI can help us find patterns that could be incredibly meaningful, it is not telling the story about what it means. And that requires judgment, discernment, wisdom, and context. And that's what the human brings to the equation.
That's an interesting point you bring up because so much of modern large language model implementation has to do with around context. We can only take models so far. I feel like every week there's a new champion model. Humbled and honored to have pass the MMLU or whatever benchmark. But there's a certain point. Sam Altman says this PhD in your pocket. It's like, great, I have a PhD in, I don't know, geological studies in my pocket, but it doesn't know my business documents. Is there an element where, as a researcher, you're going into the field for the first time? Maybe you just graduated, or you finished a postdoc, and now you're going into industry, where you have to change your mindset of how you look at problems in the business world versus in the laboratory world.
Oh yeah, I mean, if valuing a product for its viability in the marketplace, it's completely different than is this idea interesting, right? Academics, the product are little pieces of the universal puzzle, right? Like you produce a little kernel of knowledge, and that gets put into the pool of universal knowledge that we all share as a human, right? That is very different than preparing a widget that needs to be
Mm.
have utility, needs to be understandable and consumable by a particular market subsection. And then you have timelines in industry that are, insane to someone that has tenure in academia and has the benefit of being able to think deeply about what they're doing. One thing that I do want to say about the difference between academia and industry and sort of where that sort of discernment and that wisdom comes in is that when you're looking at sort of big data sets and making a decision, you can have your PhD in your pocket because like in martial arts and you get a black belt, that just means that you have earned the right to become a student. That's what that black belt really means in a true martial art, right? I think that the same thing is true of a PhD. As a science communicator, I do and have done what we are asking our AIs to do very frequently. I've deeply researched a topic, I've synthesized the information, I put it together in a coherent story. And then I do my personal job, right, of making sure and judging it and making sure that it's ready for whatever stakeholder audience, has employed me to prepare that kernel of knowledge. But I always add a layer, which is the human check layer, if you think about this being an AI process, because I can look at what's been published, but I don't know what people think about it. So I can ask one PhD researcher, or I can ask a professor that's been in the field for 30 years. I'm going to get a completely different answer. Hey, what do you think about, CRISPR-Cas9 and, its ability to have impact in human biology? A graduate student that has just gotten their PhD and a professor are going to give you hugely, wildly different contextual answers to that question. And that's the check that I want. I don't want to be putting out a biased piece of information. I want to know, what does the community think? What is the accepted truth? And then I need that filter before it goes out into the world.
Yeah, I really like that take because so much of at least the industry that I work in is, bring the strongest model you have, bring the best PhD quote in your pocket that you have. But what if that's not the answer that you really want or need? Just because it's kind of the phrase, it's just because I got a PhD in my pocket, do I need to use it?
Right. And, I'm the first one to tell you, like, I don't know everything about nicotine dependence, but that's what my PhD was on. I can give you a very, very deep rundown on nicotinic acetylcholine receptors if anybody cares,
Say that 5 times
but
fast.
that doesn't mean that I'm going to be able to answer all questions about smoking behavior, smoking cessation, or the state of the art.
That's. I was just thinking to myself, saying that 5 times fast would be quite the challenge. But I'm sure you probably figured out at this point.
I've had practice.
All right, let's jump on to segment two. I should come up with
Mm,
like these grand titles or have a transition slide for us, but life got busy for you too. Talking about personal outcomes and applications when we
mm.
use chatbots like ChatGPT. So we're restricted to these one-on-one working relationships. When we work with ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot, if you're for those Grok users out there, we use ChatGPT as this data analysis. We use it as a research assistant. Some use it as a life coach versus working with a teammate and a group thought partner. Can you share some of the experience that you had? And I'm kind of listing off some conversations we've had in the past, the Neuro Plus AI or the Brookings Institute's vibe coding framework. I'd love for you to go into that a little bit.
Yeah, I really see that as sort of the next frontier in terms of the user interface with AI. I think, we're getting more and more comfortable with it as a one-on-one tool, but I'm interested in how is it going to impact the culture of the team, the cadence of the team's operation, but also, how do you bring it in as a teammate? If you think about your team as like the knights of the round table, everyone in your team has a particular area of expertise. They have their skill that makes them dangerous, but they also have their asymmetries, their strengths and their weaknesses, and that's why there is a team, to kind of fill in those gaps. So what role will AI play, on that team? How do we define the role, the skills, and the asymmetries for, that particular teammate? There's been some ongoing research on this. I'm really excited about the work that Jacob Taylor at Brookings Institute is doing. So they took a collaborative model that Brookings has been using for a long time and in applying it to the UN sustainability goals with just human collaboration. And they added an AI agent, as a helper to those teams. And this was done as part of the collective intelligence conference that was held at UC San Diego a few months ago. And so everyone in the room was an expert of some kind on, team or organizational behavior or computer learning, we were all experts. And it was really interesting because we realized that the AI agent needed a physical place in the room. Like when we talk about sitting around the table, it wasn't beneficial for each of us to continue to sit behind our screen, talk to each other, and then go back and work with the AI that had been trained specifically for this exercise, and then go back into human sort of brainstorming and collaboration. That was incredibly difficult, and something that was a big topic during the debrief afterwards. If it was treated like a person, if it had a space at the table and we all worked on the prompts together, would we have gotten to where we wanted to go faster? And I think this is going to start influencing the way that teams operate, and it's going to be really challenging for leaders and for managers that are implementing technologies in their workplace, because suddenly the way we work is going to shift and they're going to have to be ready for that.
How did during that example that you shared from the conference at UC San Diego, how did having a team thought partner reshape those group dynamics? Were there certain leadership roles that others took on that they might not have taken on, or did trust change within that team?
I think we really wanted the AI agent to be more helpful than it was. And so I think it was almost like a no child left behind situation where when the AI wasn't being as helpful or didn't quite get it, I think perhaps we leaned in a little bit too much and wanting to drag it along. as a, because also, as I said, we're experts in this area. So that's actually what we're
Yeah.
interested in, right?
Yeah.
Yes, we were given a goal, to come up with a strategy for solving one of the, a problem aligned with the sustainability goal by the end of the day. But we were kind of interested in, what's going on here? Why is this not emulating a human collaborator in quite the same way? And we're asking it to play the role of information synthesis and reporting, right? So we would do a session, and then we would ask the AI to synthesize and report, what we were talking about, and tell us sort of where to go next. And a lot of times, those of us that were experienced consultants that had done workshops that, that were really comfortable in this area, we're like, that's not my instinct for where this really should be going next. So there was a lot of friction there.
Now, so we talked about how you can use it as kind of helping manage discussions as a team member. What are the
Mm-hmm.
one-on-one, I'm just kind of putting that neurological hat on. What are the
Mm-hmm.
one-on-one benefits, say having a reflective agent to be able to bounce ideas off? Have you seen any studies on the market, or is there any research being done specifically to show the improvements in our own reasonings versus, you do see MIT publishing, the studies on metacognitive laziness with the copy and pasting of ChatGPT. Where's some of the silver linings that we can look forward to of using it as kind of a conversation starter for us?
Yeah, I think that there's a few areas. One for me, as someone that deals with ADHD daily, ChatGPT and Claude and all of these other agents has freed me from the tyranny of the blank page. I can dump a completely disorganized, thought waterfall of thoughts into a prompt box and get something that closely resembles coherence. And that's very helpful for me. I think we see coaching and one-on-one interactions being really helpful, especially for like in the moment feedback. Look, from a human psychology perspective, when we're activated, we're in an emotional place, we're really passionate about our work. Sometimes, we're not able to think as rationally or as openly about solutions as we would like. And, you don't always have the opportunity to call your partner or call the consultant that's helping you manage this, organizational transformation effort, or, you have to wait till next week for your next session, with your coach. Having feedback, what are my options, both for what to say, how to respond, and how to be, are incredibly useful. And you mentioned NeuroPlus, which is one of the one-on-one professional coaching agents that I really prefer. They have really tried to tune their models away from the dark triad of narcissism and some of the other types of fallacies that we can fall into in human behavior, and really work on interventions that are positive, that are constructive, and that are consistent with the psychosocial needs that we all have. I mean, they're coming out of a neuro consulting firm that I have worked very closely with, Neuro Group. And so that's consistent with their ethos. And so that's sort of how they have trained their particular coach. And I recommend it. I use it myself really often.
Right. Kind of a plug. If you have any questions for Dr. Dilworth as we have this discussion, please put them in the chat. And instead of saving them to the end, I'll try to intertwine them as we go. Okay, Crystal, third tier. Let's talk about some of the how ways AI propagates different cultural assumptions about their user base. One of the examples that you had given previously was this culturally responsive AI tool,
Mm-hmm.
specifically the Air Lab at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, so it's about look, we were talking about like training data and how these agents, how these models are being directed to give us the information that we're asking for, right? And there's different cultural expectations that we have. And when I'm talking about cultural, I'm not just talking about organization to organization in this context. I'm talking about geographic, cultural differences. And it's something that I know a lot about, having worked for Toyota out of their Silicon Valley office, and interfacing with their headquarters in Tokyo, having worked in Indonesia and in Singapore, and coming from a very Western United States, Silicon Valley, California sort of focused way of being accustomed to the cadence of business. And so I think that's something else, like where I was talking earlier about how do people want their information? How do they want it ordered, but also how quickly do they want it? Right. And so being able to work with an AI and say, I'm working with a rural population of farmers in Bangladesh, help me help them. And like, I promise you what ChatGPT spits out will not be relevant to the farmers, with their problem, right? And that goes to like stakeholders and context and judgment and wisdom. And what Fatima Zahra is doing at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, is developing models that are culturally responsive, that can be helpful and relevant, in different regions, different markets, with different types of problems, and really investigating what it takes to build and develop something with embedded cultural values that are separate from those that we're most exposed to, because where are the biggest data sets? How are we biasing our algorithms?
Now, a couple of years ago, when a lot of the new LLMs came out, we have seen improvements into debiasing. When some of the large vision models first came out, or at least the more popular ones, you said, show me a picture of a CEO, it would just be a bunch of old white, Caucasian guys.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that was what was available online. Are there any companies that you feel are doing a good job at, I don't want to say debiasing, but creating more culturally sensitive, regional specific based AI products?
No. And I think that that's something that we should all be aware of, especially leaders that are looking to implement AI based tools into their organizations. You are skewing, nudging your culture and your human practices and rituals in a particular direction with that choice. Like we can't have this conversation without talking about like Dr. Joy. I'm going to say her name
I
wrong
know
and it's going
exactly
to be
who you're
horrible.
talking about. Yep.
Yolamwini, she's absolutely incredible. Like we have to, she wrote the book Unmasking AI. She is the leading voice internationally
And that's
in.
coming out of MIT Media Lab, correct?
Yes, that's coming out
Okay.
of MIT Media Lab. She graduated with her PhD in 2022. So her thesis, I'm sorry to admit I haven't gone through her entire thesis yet, but I am reading it. Like her work, and you were talking about the work that she did with Timnit Gebru on what is it called, gender shades. When
Yep.
it comes to what images are we being shown. She's kind of like the gold standard in terms of communicating how important it is for us to evaluate who has coded our algorithms and what assumptions have been put in there. Like on a positive way, I heard a software engineer say once that every line of code is a vote for an imagined future, which is a really lovely way of saying the person that is doing the coding is embedding
Can,
their
can
own.
can you repeat that one more time for folks who might have missed that? Because I think that was a very powerful statement.
Every line of code is a vote for an imagined future. And I think the key word there is imagined, right? Because that is what's connected to human belief, human creativity, and makes the creation of code, it puts it in human context, right? It's not neutral. It's never neutral, because I'm sorry to tell you, if you've worked with other humans, humans are not neutral,
Yeah.
as much as we would like to think that we are. And that's what Dr. Joy means when she talks about the coded gaze. There is bias that is in every single algorithm because a person wrote it. And you don't get away from that with AI writing your code because somebody trained and designed that AI. So one of the things I think is like both exciting and a risk that that organizational leaders are not looking at enough right now, because they're making critical choices on enterprise-wide implementations of AI, based on, how can this help with optimization or, all of these transactional things. Um, but, if you're a CEO of a large company or even a small company, be talking to your chief people officers, be talking to the people in your organization that are experts in nudge methodology and choice architecture, and have them help you evaluate those tools and understand how you are shifting your culture and perhaps even the values of your organization through that choice of what technology you're going to implement. Because look, we tend to discount it as, soft skills are a soft metric, but the value of your organization is in your people and in your culture and in the way that they work together. And anyone that's looked at the outcome of a private equity sale will agree that the value of the organization was not just what was on the spreadsheet, right?
Yeah.
And so you may not be preserving that value in your organization because of an ignorant choice that you made based on product features. When you're making these decisions. So if you don't have people in your organization that are looking at that, then perhaps you should consider bringing in a consultant or a third party that can bridge that for you and for your people, because I think it's going to be critical.
I feel like that's a message not only for, the chief human resource officers out there, but also a lot of the C-suite, because we see so many of these hyperscalers, these cloud platforms,
Yeah.
many new AI vendor companies saying, if only you buy our product, your ROI will, whatever X or whatever KPI you're associating it with. But we only look at the P&L line when we're making that decision. It's not what's going to happen to the culture, what's going to happen to people who like working on a project and like a little bit of the struggle so they cognitively continue to improve in their job. So we're not just remote zombies. The MIT phrased it metacognitive laziness of copy paste chat GPT. This kind of goes into the same area, but do we see, say, for example, if you buy an AI tool, maybe it's some kind of workflow automation, how are you able to see the biases that might come up if you're measuring culture or performance or leadership behavior, kind of these squishy characteristics that are removed from the ROI and the revenue line?
Yeah, I mean, I think where the discernment and judgment is coming in. So, is it making recommendations, and on what values-based framework is it relying on when making those recommendations?
Mm.
I think how it is rewarding success for the human members of the team, I think, is really important. Where the collaborative touch points are happening, whether those are tied into human checkpoints and approvals, that's another place to go. I mean, and there's also, we're talking about like people analytics. This is the rich area for AI applications as well, right? Like how do you get the right AI to manage your culture? And what you are looking at and what you are measuring in terms of culture is also incredibly revealing of your own, leadership or organizational bias, and very important for like cultural development and maintenance as well. Like I work on a project. I'm a scientific advisor for a HR AI platform called Instill.ai. And this is, hoping to measure your culture and reduce burnout. And there's a huge a portion of it where you need to design what you think the culture is or should be. There's a huge sort of need for you as a leader or as an organization to put your values and your philosophy into that program in order for it to be giving you recommendations that are consistent with where you want to go, to make sure that you're not shifting to something that's easy to measure but not what you want.
Yeah. I kind of one last question on this pillar of bias and culturally
Mm.
representative types of AI. When organizations choose an AI provider, and I'm thinking large scale enterprise, those that have multi-million dollar contracts with AWS, Azure, Databricks, fill in the blank there. Are we assuming that we're being locked in to essentially a cultural and philosophical assumption based on these platforms? Or do you see this as kind of a continuum that these large hyperscalers are going to continue to evolve and we hope become more culturally representative? Or are we stuck and locked into whatever AI tool we signed up for?
I think to a certain extent, we're already locked in. I mean, I have no interest in my personal laptop being a PC anytime soon because of the cognitive friction it would take to shift back over and to think about, that a completely different way of organizing information, right? Like my brain has started to model the way that my Mac organizes information so that I could work collaboratively with my laptop, you know? And so I think we're already locked in, to in one way or
We
another.
just we just lost 50% of our listeners right there. Actually, maybe
Well,
that's too
my
strong.
apologies.
It's too strong of a number for Windows. We'll give it a good 10%.
Look, don't even get me started on like the Microsoft Teams platform.
I think that you would not be stretching it to say that since the advent of Clippy in the early
Mm.
2000s, there's been a sweet spot in continually being able to poke fun at Microsoft products.
Look, Clippy was adorable, but not particularly helpful. It was just before its time, right? Like now, if that was your AI chatbot, right? I think you would get more of the pseudo relationship you wanted out of the cartoon character.
I don't know, not unlike Microsoft Copilot these days, but I'll leave my personal opinions to myself. All right, one last question to round it out before we'll start hitting some user questions. So, are those of us who are, dare I say, making AI possible, asking the right required questions about kind of what you're talking about, cultural, philosophical assumptions? Are we nudging our organizations towards, the right provider, or is this just a conversation that only C-level executives are able to have? How do you involve the organization in these types of conversations?
Yeah, I think one way is to make sure that your people ops team is involved in these decisions. And I know it would seem like that, that is not the most relevant team you would call first when you're considering a, new technology implementation, other than, hey, can you manage the fact that people hate change? But I think they need to be involved in the decision because of its impact in culture much, much earlier. Um, it's very different. I would love to say, no, everyone that's working on this needs to be thinking about this, right? But like everyone has their area of expertise and everyone has their own vantage point to which to make these evaluations. I don't need to tell you or this audience about how fast like this technology is evolving and how difficult it is just to keep up with it on the technical side. But that also means that the people that are in there developing the next wave that, technology are not having philosophical discussions about, what this means for the future of humanity. So the question I think that you've just asked me, Nick, is who needs to be thinking of the future of humanity as we, co-evolve with this technology that we've created? And the answer is everyone and the leaders and the government. And, this is the whole conversation about governance and ethics.
Yeah.
And what we value as humans, as like the I hate to say like Western culture and Eastern culture. I don't think that that's really fair, but I do think that there's like, geographical differences in our cultural values.
Regional,
And
yeah.
yeah, and that governance of these technologies will be heavily influenced by those regional values. So, we should all be talking about it and aware of it. And I think that's what, Dr. Joy's work really shows us.
Yeah.
But it's I'm not going to sit here and tell you, oh, it's easy. Everyone should have it top of mind as we're like just struggling to read the news feed of like the new stuff
Yeah.
that's coming out.
Especially with the OpenAI Dev Day and day two right now. We're just trying to, catch up what happened yesterday.
I mean, you and I are already behind because we've been talking for 40 minutes.
Yeah. I fear like, taking a week vacation and having to, get back up to speed on all the technology, all the new model updates, all the new framework releases.
I mean, everyone that I talk to that works in this space says that even the people that are working in this space can't keep up. They only
Yeah.
see a portion of what's happening. And so the best we can all do, listeners, is try and pay attention as much as we can and make sure that we're not completely biased and only looking at information coming from a single source.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, let's bring it on to a different topic. I would love to hear what's on deck for Watson Lecture series. And if you could do some plugs on, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Watson Lectures, why it has had such success for 103, 104 years running consistently.
Yeah, the Watson lectures are really unique, I think, production for Caltech. It's one of the few ways that the public can really have intimate access to the research that's happening on campus and regularly. So it's one Wednesday night a month during the school year. So this October will be the first one of this academic year, and I'm embarrassed to say I cannot remember the exact date, but Nick, maybe you can tell me, exactly which Wednesday it is.
I'm
And
looking it up right now.
okay, amazing. And it's a festival and a celebration of the research that's happening on campus. So what you would expect is you would register for tickets online. They're free, but they just want to know how many people are coming. Show up early, grab a drink, get some food from a food cart, talk to the students from the professor that's giving the talk that evening. It's always a different division, a different, type of research. So you'll get a chance to really talk to some of the students or some of the postdocs that are doing the work in the lab. Have a good time, talk to other science nerds or not so science nerds, that are out there. There's live music. And then what to expect from the actual program is we have a lot of young faculty this year, which is
Mhm.
incredible. You'll hear a Caltech faculty member give a talk about their own research, hopefully in a way that's consumable by the general public. So the science communication kind of comes in, like translating highly technical and complex concepts in a way that a public audience should be able to understand is the challenge that we put to our faculty for this. I host a Q&A with them afterwards. So if you as an audience member have questions, there's a way to submit those questions and hopefully get them answered on stage. And then there's a little bit of time afterwards if you want to stand in line and wait to talk to the speaker, and really get some one-on-one time with a tenured faculty member at one of the world's leading academic institutions. You can do that. So if you're in the Los Angeles area, I really recommend coming to campus for the Watson lectures because it's a really great time.
All right, so I just put in a link to it'll bring you to the Watson Lectures curriculum or event schedule. The next one's October 22nd with Dr. Nick Hotzler, who also is Caltech alum, talking about various things in physics and fundamental particles. But for those who are interested in AI, here's some of the standouts. Ashwin Vasavada from NASA Jet Propulsion Lab will be talking about the Curiosity rover, which has a high level of autonomy and computer vision. Another AI world influencer, Professor Katie Bauman, will also be talking about her work within AI and physics. And so there's a lot of areas of AI that are not necessarily what we would think of, just only interacting with, what makes ChatGPT special. But from the scientific community, what are those niche areas? What are those areas that are adjacent, just tangent to AI, and how they're leveraging that in research? So a lot of really cool areas. All right,
I have to say that there's always an audience member that submits a question. How has AI impacted your research? Doesn't matter what the topic is. That's always a question that I get.
I thought one of the funniest, because I see you screening the questions during the
Oh yeah.
talk, and I know that you shared in the past that some students will ask, why is office hours canceled this week or something, and you're streaming it around the world at the same time, so that's
It's a
interesting.
nice way to kind of just see what it's like to be a member of the Caltech academic community.
All right, so we've got a special guest on here, one of our CTME industry experts in systems engineering and project management, Stefan Gane, asks, following up on your last point of who needs to be involved in the conversation, do you have any thoughts on how to approach or challenge the potential of a paradigm where organizations begin to see the AI-generated answers as the quote-unquote true correct answer, and forecloses on ideas and solutions that are beyond the current grasp of the models? That's a really good question.
Okay, can you repeat the second part of the question to
Yeah,
make sure that
it was a two-parter here.
yeah.
So organizations seeing that this is a correct answer coming from AI, and then now ideas and solutions that people would have are now out of scope and not seen as contribution to that conversation.
Yeah, I think that's one of the really difficult parts of looking to AI for generation, right? But when I think about the use of AI for generation of new ideas, new concepts, whatever, I actually think about it as generalization, right? Because it only knows what has been done in the past. So looking at it for like from a unique solutions perspective is maybe asking it to do a little bit more than it's ready to do just yet. And so that's an important part of decision making that we try and discuss with our managers and with our leaders that are working on collaborations with AI technology. I wish that I had a perfect answer for this very, very difficult question. Um, I do see, and maybe you do too, generational differences. I think that,
Oh, very much
um,
so.
yeah, and I don't necessarily mean that the kids coming in, your youngest employees are the ones that are most skeptical. No, it's because they lack the discernment and the judgment in the role that they're in. They're more likely to take whatever the AI recommends as gospel because they don't know any better. Then you've got a gap of people that are able to be more skeptical and do double checking because they're on their way up, right? So I'm looking at this from a human motivation perspective, right? So what risk is taking the AI answer as gospel to you personally if you're climbing the corporate ladder, right?
Mm.
So that's kind of a way that I like to talk about it when I'm doing sort of like smaller workshops. Why would I double check? Well, because you're actually on the hook for AI's decision and you are apparently trying to get better and make more money and maybe one day buy a house in this economy. And then you have the
We just want
layer,
to pay off our loans. We just want to pay
right?
off our loans, student
Student
loans.
loans or house loans or whatever it is, right? And then you have the top layer, which is, I think, where a lot of the exciting work to be done is, where you have your, uh, I'm trying to think of like you're sort of like the temple of graybeards that have all of the contextual information from being in business for so long. And I think what we need to work with them on is helping to understand how to interpret the information that's both coming from their AI agent, but also coming from their lieutenants and
Yeah.
discerning how much of the information that's coming from their lieutenants is actually influenced by the AI and how much of that is the human judgment that they employ those lieutenants to deploy. So I hear you on the problem. I think we need to stratify the solution a little bit. And my instinct is always to go on the. I'm a neuroscientist, so I'm going to go on the human motivation. side of it as opposed to the technical solution. I
Yeah.
hope that was
No, that answer was
moderately
spot on.
satisfying.
That was spot on. Well, as promised, I'm going to try to get you out of here on time. One thing that I wanted to post is we have an on-demand course. We've been in the recording studio for the last couple of months creating a course called AI Tools for Everybody. And this is a course that features 6 publicly and free tools, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Manus, and shows you how to put them in workflows for both your professional and your personal life. I've gone ahead and put the link there. The October cohort has already begun, but the November cohort is open. And we do update our tools as new models are released and new technology. Secondly, if you like what you've heard today and you want more of Dr. Dilworth, or if you want to talk about organizational change and how AI is adopted, we tailor courses specifically for companies and organizations to come to campus, or we come to you, and you can hear from professors, you can hear from researchers like Dr. Dilworth, or you can hear from industry experts as well from both small and large companies, really about any area that you want to do, from hands-on AI engineering all the way to C-suite. How do I deal with vendors? How do I deal with governance? And how do I deal with implementing many of the AI challenges that we have today? Dr. Dilworth, I cannot thank you enough for joining us. Very excited to see you around campus. Any parting words? How do people get in touch with you? I think is probably the main question folks have.
Come to a Watson lecture. You'll be able to talk to me in person, if you're in the area. And then I actually, you can reach out through my website, which is drbrain.phd. Dr. Brain is the character that I play on the CBS television show that I'm on, Mission Unstoppable, where we talk about brains and all the weird stuff that they do. So yeah, that would be probably the best place to get in touch with me.
Great. For those that you can't see the post that I did, if you go on to Caltech Watson Lectures or just Google that, you'll be able to see the signups. You'll probably run into me, definitely in the food truck line, listening to some of the jazz ensemble. One of the very cool things that the astronomy labs do is they bring out a lot of their heavy-duty telescopes. And also, if you are curious about the free AI tools class, type in Caltech AI tools, and it'll bring you right to the link. All right, until next time, thank you very much. Dr. Dilworth, talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Bye.